It was my birthday, a day that should have been filled with warmth and celebration, but instead found me sitting alone in the quietude of my living room. Outside, a gentle snow drifted past the window, each flake a tiny ephemeral dancer against the graying sky. In my hands, I held a pristine white envelope, the starkness of the paper a cruel contrast to the fragile hope I had carried just hours before. Inside was a diagnosis report, fresh from the hospital, bearing the clinical, impersonal language that had shattered my illusion of stability. The doctor, a kind man with tired eyes and a gentle demeanor, had explained it to me patiently. The old injury in my lower back, the one I'd sustained decades ago working the demanding shifts at Harbor Machinery, had flared up again. The imaging shows a significant disc herniation, he'd said, his voice low and serious. It's pressing on your sciatic nerve. Left untreated, it could lead to permanent nerve damage. He spoke of potential outcomes that sent a chill down my spine, losing the ability to walk, perhaps even ending up bedridden. You need surgery soon, he emphasized, his gaze unwavering. Delaying it carries significant risks. Then came the part that felt like a punch to the gut. He removed his glasses, his gestures slow and deliberate, as if bracing himself for my reaction. The surgery itself, plus the necessary rehabilitation and physical therapy, it's going to run you a bit over $30,000. His tone was calm, almost sympathetic, but the warning was clear and unmistakable. It was a financial chasm I hadn't anticipated, a mountain I wasn't sure I had the strength to climb alone. I nodded, forcing a polite smile I didn't feel. My chest tightened, a familiar knot of anxiety forming deep within. As soon as he left, I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I navigated to my banking app. I had just over $10,000 in my checking account, a sum I had carefully accumulated over the years, a safety net for unexpected expenses. The rest of my savings, a more substantial amount, was tied up in a 3-year certificate of deposit, a low-risk investment that wouldn't mature for another 3 months. Pulling it early would incur a substantial penalty, a chunk of interest I couldn't afford to lose. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the faint whispers of the wind outside. I stared at the numbers on the screen, doing the math in my head. 10,000 was a start, but it was nowhere near 30. My mind raced, exploring possibilities, discarding them one by one. There were no other sources of income, no hidden stashes of cash. My pension was enough to live on comfortably, but not to cover a $30,000 medical emergency. Hesitantly, I considered my options. Family, my sons, David and Eric. They were successful, established. David, the academic, a professor at a respected university. Eric, the entrepreneur, running a thriving auto repair business. They had always told me they would take care of me, that I wouldn't have to worry. Now was the time to test that promise. After agonizing over it for what felt like an eternity, I dialed David's number. The phone rang several times before he finally answered, his voice tinged with annoyance, as if I had interrupted something important. "Mom, is everything okay?" "David," I began, my voice a little shaky. I'm in the hospital." "The hospital? What happened?" The annoyance in his voice was still there, but a flicker of concern seemed to pierce through. "My back," I explained, the words tumbling out quickly. "The old injury. I was helping a man whose truck had flipped over at the market, and I twisted it. The doctor says I might need surgery." In the background, I could hear a cacophony of sounds, laughter, shouting, the general hubbub of what sounded like a schoolyard. "Mom, I'm with my students right now. We've got some activity going on. Let the doctors take a look first, figure out exactly what's going on. I'll call you later, okay?" He sounded rushed, eager to end the conversation. My heart sank a little, but I understood. He was busy, he had responsibilities. "Okay, David, just call me when you can." "Will do," he replied, and then the line went dead. I lay back on the hospital bed, the sterile white sheets feeling cold against my skin. The initial wave of panic had subsided, replaced by a dull ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my back. When the doctor returned with the official report, his expression confirmed what I already feared. Acute disc herniation, nerves compressed, immediate surgery recommended. He repeated the cost, the number echoing in the quiet room. 35,000, including the rehabilitation. If you delay, Mrs. Whitman, there's a significant risk you might not regain full mobility. You could lose the ability to walk. I clutched the payment slip, my palm gone cold and clammy. 35,000. It was more than the doctor had initially estimated. My 15,000 in checking felt insignificant, a drop in the ocean. The rest was tied up, inaccessible without penalty. I hesitated for a long time, staring at the slip, the numbers blurring through the unshed tears in my eyes. I had always been independent, resourceful. I had raised my sons alone, navigated financial hardships, overcome obstacles with sheer determination. Asking for help, especially financial help, went against everything I had ever stood for. But this was different. This wasn't about pride. It was about my ability to walk, my independence in my old age. Reluctantly, I picked up the phone again and dialed David's number. This time, it rang several times before he finally answered, his voice even more irritated than before. Mom, I'm prepping for class. Make it quick. I lowered my voice, trying to keep it steady, to convey the seriousness of the situation without sounding desperate. David, the surgery, it's going to cost 30,000. I don't have enough. Can you loan me 10? I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. I'll pay you back when my CD matures in a few months. There was a pause, a long, drawn-out silence that stretched across the phone line. 2 seconds, maybe 3, but it felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed, as if he were trying to prevent someone from overhearing. Mom, it's not that I don't want to help, but you know how tight things are right now. We just moved into a new place. The mortgage is astronomical. I've got classroom supplies to pay for, and the kids' summer camp is costing a fortune. I really don't have extra cash. My heart sank further. But David, the doctor said, "Are you sure the hospital isn't scamming you?" He interrupted, his voice taking on a cautionary tone. "There are a lot of frauds out there these days, Mom, especially targeting older people. You need to be careful." My voice rose slightly, a hint of desperation creeping in, despite my efforts to remain calm. "David, why would I lie to you? This is straight from the doctor." I tried to explain the severity of the diagnosis, the risk of permanent immobility, but he seemed unwilling to listen, or perhaps unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation. He let out a vague sigh. "Maybe you should talk to Eric," he suggested, his voice suddenly brighter, as if he had found a convenient solution. "He's running a business. His finances are probably more flexible than mine. I really can't help right now, Mom. I've got to go." The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at the screen. The call ended notification, a stark reminder of his dismissal. A wave of nausea washed over me. Eric, my younger son, the one who had promised to take care of me too. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I tapped on Eric's number. It rang 3 times before he picked up, the sound of car horns and the bustle of the street echoing in the background. His voice came through quick and distracted. "Mom, what's up?" "I'm in the middle of a business meeting." I tried to keep my voice calm to mirror his casual tone, but I knew I was failing. "Eric, something happened. My old back injury flared up. The doctor says I need surgery soon. I'm short on funds. Could you loan me 10,000? There was a pause, another agonizing silence. Then his response came, blunt and unyielding. "I can't." My heart constricted. "You can't?" "Honestly, Mom, the shop's been struggling lately. Loans, rent. It's been suffocating." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice held a note of defensiveness. "And didn't you get hurt helping someone out? Shouldn't he be the one paying for it?" The logic, cold and calculated, stung more than his refusal. "I really don't have that kind of money right now. Maybe you could ask one of the other relatives." My voice dropped to a whisper, my throat tight and raw. "Eric, please, just this once. Think about everything I did to get you through school, to help you open that shop." I reminded him of the sacrifices I had made, the overtime hours, the lean years, all to give him a chance at building his own life. He let out a tired sigh. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but the lack of empathy was palpable. "Mom, I've got my own problems. I've got to go. We'll talk later, okay?" The call ended. I kept the phone to my ear for several more seconds, motionless, the dial tone a mocking soundtrack to my despair. Only when the busy signal returned did I gently lower it onto the blanket. In that moment, the world felt completely still. The snow outside seemed to stop falling. The sounds of the hospital faded away. I leaned back against the hospital bed, the silence amplifying the ache in my heart. Memories flooded my mind, a torrent of images from a life dedicated to my children. The years of night shifts on the factory floor, the rhythmic clatter of machinery echoing through my bones, a constant reminder of the physical toll I paid to provide for them. The patched up clothes I wore while cooking dinner, stretching every dollar to put food on the table. The freezing winter nights when I bundled them in quilts and ran to the ER with a fevered child in my arms, my own fears pushed aside by the urgency of their need. I had thought I'd made it through the hard part of life. I had survived poverty, loss, and the relentless demands of single parenthood. I had raised two seemingly successful, independent men. I had believed that in this last stretch, in my old age, I wouldn't have to lie awake wondering how to pay for a critical surgery. But I was wrong. I wasn't one of those elderly living alone cases you see on the news, the ones neglected and forgotten. I had two sons, I had a home, I had a pension, I had what they call a family. And yet, lying there in that sterile hospital room, I realized the hardest thing isn't being alone. It's having a family and still feeling like a castaway on some remote island, shouting for help that never comes. That night, sleep eluded me. Sometime after midnight, the woman in the next bed stirred. Her daughter, who had been sleeping in a chair by her side, woke instantly. I watched as she helped her mother to the bathroom, her movements gentle and solicitous, her voice a soft whisper. "Take your time, Mom." They stepped out together, and the room went quiet again. I lay there staring at the ceiling, eyes wide open, the scene replaying in my mind. It was a simple act of care, yet it held a profound weight. The next morning, to my surprise, David showed up. He came in wearing his jacket, a cup of coffee in his hand, looking tired, not the kind of tired that comes from worry or sleepless nights spent at a loved one's bedside, but the kind that comes from obligation, from fulfilling a duty. His first words weren't, "How are you feeling?" or "Are you in pain?" They were a question wrapped in skepticism, concern tinged with suspicion. "Mom, are you sure this hospital's legit?" He shifted his weight, his gaze sweeping around the room. "You know how the healthcare system is these days. They'll scare you half to death just to get you on the operating table. Maybe I should take you somewhere else for a second opinion." I forced myself to sit up, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain shooting down my spine. "This is the hospital I've always gone to," I said, trying to keep my voice even. The doctor explained everything clearly. "They're not scaring me, David. I need the surgery, and I need the money for it." David frowned, his expression one of impatience rather than genuine worry. "Mom, don't get all emotional. Conservative treatment can work too. I had a coworker who got better just taking meds, didn't spend a cent on surgery." His words, delivered with a casual dismissiveness, felt like a slap in the face. My heart sank. I could see right through him. This wasn't about my health or my well-being. It was about money, about dodging the cost of my medical care. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, though the tears were close to the surface. I just asked one quiet question, my voice barely above a whisper. "David, are you really going to let me end up in a bed, needing help just to get to the bathroom?" His tone turned stiff, defensive. "Mom, don't say that. I've got my own pressures. You can't only think about this from your perspective." He stayed for less than 20 minutes, then glanced at his watch, muttering something about a staff meeting, and left. As for Eric, he never showed up. Since that day, he's only sent a few short texts. "How are you feeling today?" or "Hope you're getting better." But nothing more. No visit, no call back, just silence. I tried to explain my situation to them, told them about the surgery, the mounting costs, how I was struggling to make ends meet. But their replies were always the same: "Busy right now," or "Just hang in there." Sometimes they didn't even bother to respond at all. Lying there in my hospital bed, I watched the woman in the next bed as her son peeled an apple for her. His hands moved with practiced ease, his voice soft and kind as he spoke to her. The whole scene looked like something straight out of a commercial. warm, gentle, full of love and care. And just like that, something sharp and small pierced my chest. I turned my head and pretended to close my eyes, but the sting reached the corners of them anyway. I wasn't jealous that she had a son. I was jealous that her son remembered who she was, that he remembered what she'd done for him, not just when he needed a signature or a power of attorney, but as a mother, as a person who had sacrificed everything for him. I thought of that bitter winter night when David had an asthma attack, his small body struggling for breath. I ran barefoot into the ER with him in my arms, so rushed in my panic I'd pulled on two different shoes. I thought of the time Eric broke his arm falling from a tree, and I borrowed money from a neighbor to take him to urgent care, then worked 3 overnight shifts in a row at the factory to make up the difference, my body aching with exhaustion, but my heart filled with relief that he was okay. I never thought of those moments as sacrifices. I just did what mothers do, what any parent would do for their child. But now, one tells me he doesn't have spare money, and the other asks if I'm sure I'm not getting scammed by the hospital. Every day, lying there staring at the sterile white ceiling, I kept asking myself, Grace, did you get it wrong? Was it a mistake to put all your hopes and dreams into your children? Those news stories about elderly parents getting forced out of their homes, pressured to sign over property, left alone while sick, I used to think they were far off tragedies, stories that happened to other people. Now, I think I might be next. The thought, chilling in its clarity, ignited a spark of defiance within me. I wouldn't let that happen. I wouldn't become another statistic, another cautionary tale. So I picked up the phone, my hand steady this time, and called Bill Simmons, my old coworker from Harbor Mechanics. We had worked side by side for 20 years on the line, two cogs in the vast machine, but bound by a shared history of grease, sweat, and unwavering loyalty. Grace, what's going on? His voice was gruff, familiar, laced with immediate concern. I heard you're in the hospital. I told him everything, the diagnosis, the need for surgery, the crushing financial burden, the silence from my sons. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then he spoke, his voice firm and unwavering. Don't you worry about the money. Why, are you 30 grand? You helped me so much back when my wife was sick. I never forgot. My throat caught, the unexpected kindness bringing tears to my eyes. Bill, you're living on retirement like me. I can't ask you to. Shut it, he barked, the familiar sound of his holler echoing across the decades, transported from the noisy shop floor to the quiet hospital room. Send me your bank account number. Your health comes first. The next day, the money landed in my account, exactly $35,000. A lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I scheduled the surgery. The recovery was difficult, the pain intense, but I pushed through, determined to regain my mobility. Recovery passed quietly. David and Eric sent the occasional text, "How are you feeling today?" Never once did they ask how much the surgery cost or if I needed anything. Neither of them visited. But Bill dropped by every few days with fresh fruit, said his wife had gotten into baking, and insisted I try her latest creation, apple pies, lemon bars, cookies still warm from the oven. Sitting there in my living room holding the wooden box, I started to see things clearly. The labels we attached to people, family, friend, they were just that, labels. What mattered was the action, the unwavering support, the quiet kindness that spoke volumes more than empty words or hesitant promises. Bill, who wasn't family by blood, had shown me more compassion and loyalty than my own sons. I started to understand who counted as family and who was just borrowing the label. 3 weeks after I was discharged, it was my 65th birthday. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine blanket of white on the ground. A sense of calm had settled over me, a quiet resolve that had been building since that day in the hospital. I wrote invitations, 3 of them, one for David and his family, one for Eric and his, and one for Bill. On the day of the party, David's family showed up late, a flurry of apologies and forced smiles. Melissa shrugged off her coat, a designer scarf wrapped around her neck, and chirped, "Happy birthday, Mom. We've just been so swamped. The bank's been crazy lately, I didn't even have time to buy a gift." I smiled, a polite practice smile. "That's all right, I'm just glad you're here." The words felt hollow as I spoke them. Eric and Jenna had arrived earlier, bless their hearts. Jenna was in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, simmering a pot of soup, my favorite chicken noodle. Eric was chopping vegetables with practiced ease, saying, "Mom, we're making this a proper meal tonight. I even learned a new recipe just for the occasion." Dinner felt easy for a while, a fragile facade of normalcy. Melissa complained about her micromanaging boss, her voice high-pitched and animated. David griped about the complexities of tenure decisions, comparing it to a presidential race. Eric chatted enthusiastically about new electric tools the shop had just acquired, his eyes bright with genuine interest. I picked up a rib with my chopsticks, smiled faintly, but inside I felt thick and heavy, like something unmoving had settled at the bottom of my chest, a lead weight of unspoken disappointments. David was mid-rant about his shrinking bonus this year when Melissa's phone, lying face up on the table, lit up with a notification. My eyes flicked to it. The screen still displayed her lock screen, her in a bathing suit, holding their son, standing on a sunlit beach, palm trees swaying behind her, blue sky overhead, ocean waves crashing in the background. I recognized that photo instantly. I'd seen it the day I got home from the hospital, scrolling through social media on the couch, a casual post that had ripped open a wound. The caption had read, "A well-deserved break in Hawaii." That trip, that luxurious vacation to a tropical paradise. That was during the exact week I lay in a hospital bed, alone and terrified, worrying about whether I'd even be able to afford to walk again. They said they had financial pressures, that there was no extra money, but somehow they managed a vacation in Hawaii. I didn't call them out, not yet. Instead, I quietly sipped my soup, letting them perform their little dinner table play, each line perfectly rehearsed, polite, proper, and entirely hollow. The irony was almost unbearable. They were sitting here talking about their financial struggles while the evidence of their recent extravagance was staring them in the face. I rose from my chair, my movements deliberate, unhurried, almost as if I wanted to give them time to stew in their unease, to let the silence thicken like fog, anticipating what was to come. I walked back to my bedroom, my steps steady despite the lingering ache in my back. A few minutes later, I came back holding the wooden box. It wasn't large, but with each step I took, it might as well have been ticking, a silent explosive in the air, ready to detonate. I sat down and placed it right in the center of the table. The rich brown wood, a stark contrast to the white tablecloth. Jenna's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Grace, what's this?" Eric glanced up from his plate and chuckled, a nervous sound. "Don't tell me that's the family heirloom Mom's been talking about all these years." Melissa put down her phone, her smile faltering slightly. David paused mid-sentence, his fork hovering in the air. I ran my hand lightly over the lid of the box, my voice calm and deliberate, resonating in the sudden quiet. "This box, I've had it for 20 years, since I worked the late shifts at Harbor Machinery. And today, on my birthday, I think it's time to open it." Jenna leaned in, clearly intrigued. "Is it something special, Grace?" David grinned, a forced attempt at lightness. "What are you hiding in there, Mom? Don't tell me you've been secretly stashing away your pension money." I placed my palm on the top of the box, my voice low but clear, like the beginning of a letter without a return address, a message sent into the void. "This box has been with me for 2 decades, and today I want to talk to you, not as your mother, but as a person who has lived a long life, who has made choices, and who has learned some hard lessons." I paused, looking around at the faces that were familiar, yet suddenly felt so far away, so distant. "All these years, I raised you both alone, from your first words to your college graduations, to your weddings and new homes. I thought the love I gave you would be returned with respect, that you'd honor it, remember it." I looked between David and Eric, letting the silence hang for just a second longer, allowing the weight of my words to settle upon them. But it only took one surgery to show me just how wrong I was. David dropped his gaze, his face flushing. Melissa clutched a napkin, compulsively wiping at a plate that was already spotless, her usual composure crumbling. Eric looked at me, guilt flickering behind his eyes, a flicker that quickly turned to unease. I turned to Bill, who was sitting quietly at the end of the table, steady as ever, like he had been for 40 years on the factory floor, never loud, but never absent, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Luckily, I wasn't entirely alone. I had a real friend, someone who, when things got hard, didn't hesitate to help. My voice softened as I looked at him, a genuine warmth replacing the coldness that had settled over me. Bill stepped up, gave me the money I needed for my surgery without a second thought. And you two, I lifted my hand off the box and my voice dropped again, cold, sharp as a winter draft, cutting through the pretense. You taught me that blood doesn't always come with responsibility. The table went completely silent, the only sound the faint clatter of a fork dropping onto a plate. You could hear Melissa swallow, the sound amplified in the hush. After a long beat, David finally spoke, his voice tight and strained. Mom, you said you'd tell us when you'd figured it out. What exactly are you trying to say? We have jobs, lives, responsibilities, too. You act like we were supposed to drop everything. Oh, busy. I cut him off, my tone rising before I could stop it, the dam of suppressed emotions finally breaking. Were you busy when you were lounging on the beaches of Hawaii? David's face went pale, his jaw slackening in surprise. Melissa's fork slipped from her fingers and clattered into her plate, the sound sharp and jarring. Eric turned toward David, eyebrows furrowed, a look of bewilderment on his face. Wait, Hawaii? You told me you couldn't leave because school was packed and you were swamped with grading. David stiffened, his eyes darting between me and Eric. It was vacation. Eric paid leave, and that trip was with our own money, Mom. You can't just weaponize the fact that we didn't lend you money. I pulled out my phone, swiped once, and turned the screen toward them. The bright image, a cruel indictment. The image was a screenshot from Bill's social media feed, Melissa standing on the beach in a swimsuit, holding their son. Palm trees swayed behind her, blue sky overhead, the timestamp a damning detail. You said you had no money, no time, but while I was lying in a hospital bed, alone and terrified, waiting for surgery, you were sipping coconut water under palm trees, taking photos, enjoying a well-deserved break. I locked eyes with David, my gaze unwavering. You're a professor. You talk about ethics and responsibility in class every day. Tell me, David, how do you live with yourself knowing this in front of your students? Melissa's face flushed deep red, her eyes wide with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Grace, that's unfair. You're blowing this out of proportion. We were under a lot of stress, too, the mortgage, the car loan. We didn't have anything left to give. Her voice was defensive, a flimsy shield against the truth. I turned to Eric, my voice even lower than before, the quietness more impactful than any shout. And what about you, Eric? You said cash flow was tight, that the shop was struggling. But the week I got discharged, I stopped by your shop. I saw your ledger. 5-figure deposits, one after another, all recorded in black and white. Eric looked down, his ears burning red, his usual swagger completely gone. His words came out strained, like they were clawing their way up from his throat, a desperate attempt to justify his actions. Mom, I didn't want to help. I was just scared. If I gave it to you and you couldn't pay it back, I'd be the one losing out. I let out a cold, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. So, to you, my worth as a mother comes down to whether or not I can repay a $10,000 loan? When you were kids, I skipped meals, worked double shifts, wore patched up coats so you could have new school clothes. When you were sick, I sat by your beds for nights on end, holding your hand while you got IVs, praying for you to get better. Now, I'm the one in the hospital in pain, and all I get are excuses, busy, no money. You thought I was being conned. You couldn't even give me your trust. David's face turned crimson, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. Mom, how can you be so cruel? We're your sons. His voice was raw, laced with a desperate plea. I looked up, meeting his gaze squarely. There was no anger in my voice now, just a quiet weariness that had settled deep into my bones, a profound sadness that transcended the moment. Sons, I said softly, the word echoing in the silence. Do you know who sat with me while I was in the hospital for over 2 weeks? Who asked if I was in pain? Who held my hand? Your concern never made it past your phones, never materialized into action. Meanwhile, Bill, who isn't even family, came every week. He brought sliced fruit, he sat with me, he showed up. The room fell into a silence so thick it was almost physical, a heavy blanket draped over the table. David stared at the floor, completely mute, his usual articulateness gone. Eric stood frozen, as if I'd slapped him in front of a crowd, the realization of his failure etched on his face. I gently closed the wooden box, the soft click a final punctuation mark on the conversation, and pulled it into my arms, my voice steady and final, cutting through the hush. I'll repay every penny I owe Bill. As for the house and my savings, the agreement is legally binding. I've signed and notarized everything. There's nothing left for you to contest. I stood up, the chair screeching loudly against the hardwood floor, the sound jarring in the silence. I rested my hand briefly on the back of the chair, a gesture of farewell, and turned toward the door. Mom, wait, where are you going? Eric rushed to my side, panic rising in his voice, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled away gently. I didn't back. I'm moving into Riverbend Retirement Community with Bill. We've already made arrangements. It's quiet, peaceful. There's a kitchen, a garden, and a few old friends living there too. Best of all, no one treats me like I'm a burden. You won't need to worry about taking care of me anymore. You don't have to answer my calls. You don't even have to remember my birthday. I reached the front door and pulled it open, the warm sunlight from the hallway spilling across my shoulders, soft and golden. Behind me, I heard Melissa start to cry, her sobs choked and muffled. Then David called out, Mom! His voice cracked, laced with something that finally resembled regret. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. In that moment, stepping out of the house that had been my home for decades, I saw things clearly for the first time in years. Real happiness isn't found in begging for love or validation from those who are unwilling or unable to give it. It's in knowing that when you fall, when you are in need, someone will reach out, not because they are obligated by blood or duty, but because they care. Real family isn't about shared DNA. It's about empathy, compassion, and unwavering support. That wooden box hadn't just held money and paper, it held the last opportunity I was ever going to give my sons to show me they understood what family truly meant. And that opportunity had passed. I stepped out into the hallway, the wooden floor creaking beneath me with each step. Every step I took felt like I was walking away from a version of myself, one who had spent her whole life believing that raising children guaranteed a safety net in old age, that the love she had given would be reciprocated when she needed it most. Maybe one day, when they have children of their own, when they face the demands and sacrifices of parenthood, they'll understand. They'll understand that when someone grows old, they don't want expensive gifts or empty birthday greetings. They want someone who will sit with them in a hospital room, who will ask if they are in pain, who will walk into the operating room with them without needing to be asked. That moment, they missed it. The day I moved into the Riverbend retirement community, the weather was perfect. The sun stretched lazily across the garden benches and maple trees, casting everything in a soft, golden calm. Riverbend was peaceful, a small community nestled beside a gentle river, where every resident was over 60. There were no collection calls, no whispers about being a burden. No one asked when I was going to move back home. I loved the slow rhythm of life here. Afternoon tea at 3, the reading nook next to the sunroom filled with worn books and comfortable chairs, and the way the light fell through the library windows in the late afternoon. Most of all, I loved that no one here asked, "Where are your children?" Because everyone here already knew that question, more than any, can cut the deepest. On my third day, Bill and I sat together in the garden. He was the same as ever, gruff voice, laughed like shingles falling off a rooftop, a comforting presence. You settling in, Grace? He asked, plopping down beside me on the bench with a cup of tea. It's nice here, Bill, I said, watching a group of women sunbathe on the lawn, their faces turned towards the sun. People read, play violin, plant flowers. No one tells you you're too old to be on your own or that you're being scammed. I didn't say what I was thinking, but Bill knew anyway. He handed me my cup and asked, his voice gentle, Either of your boys called yet? I smiled faintly, a bittersweet smile. Sort of, they've sent a few texts. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from David's lawyer. It was a formal document, yet laced with a surprising display of sincere concern and thoughtful suggestions. It asked me to reconsider my estate decisions, to open the door for discussion, to create a space for family dialogue. I sipped my tea, the warmth a contrast to the cold words on the page, as I slipped the letter back into the envelope. Inside, I included a single sticky note, my handwriting small and clear. Thank you for your concern. The agreement has been legally notarized. Any further issues, please contact my attorney. 3 days later, Eric called. Mom? His voice was thinner than I remembered, hollow around the edges, a shadow of the boisterous young man he used to be. I know I messed up. I was wondering if we could go back to how things used to be. He sounded lost, uncertain. I didn't say a word, just placed the phone on the table and let it ring itself into silence. A few minutes later, a text arrived. Mom, I just wanted a slice of your apple pie. I stared at those words for a while, my mind drifting back to my old kitchen, steam curling from the stove top, the sweet scent of cinnamon in the air, his teenage voice asking if the crust was ready yet. But all I wrote back was, I'm doing very well here. You don't need to worry about me. Life at the retirement community turned out to be more fulfilling than I could have imagined. We had gardening classes, a small theater troupe where we put on amateur plays, knitting workshops where we made scarves and blankets for local charities, and movie nights every weekend, complete with popcorn and lively discussions. Bill, ever the instigator, nominated me for activities coordinator on the resident council. I tried to turn it down, protesting that I wasn't qualified, but somehow I won by a landslide. At my first tea social as coordinator, a woman in her 90s, frail but with eyes that sparkled with life, stood up slowly with her cane and said, her voice clear and strong, Thank you, Miss Grace. You reminded us that getting older doesn't mean losing our choices or our voices. I sat in the corner, her words washing over me like sunlight melting frost, a confirmation that I had made the right decision. I used to say, I don't want to trouble my kids. Now, surrounded by friends who cared, I could finally say, I don't owe anyone anything. 2 weeks passed, and then I found another envelope from David in the mail. This one wasn't typed by a lawyer. It was handwritten, tentative, a peace offering of sorts. He wrote, Mom, I'd like to bring Ben to visit you. He's been asking about you. Ben, my only grandchild, a quiet, bright boy who had once clung to me more than his parents. His small hand nestled in mine. I stared at that sentence for a long time, the words evoking a pang of tenderness in my heart. Then I texted David back, my resolve firm. Ben is welcome, but please don't come with him. He replied almost immediately, a single word. Why? I wrote, because he doesn't owe me anything. But you? You missed your chance to repay what you did. That evening I was brewing tea in the sunroom, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the room, when Bill dragged over 2 chairs. We sat down, shoulder to shoulder, watching the last of the sun skim the glass of the river outside. After I told him about the letter and my response, he gave a small nod. So, you finally see it, Grace? I nodded back, a sense of peace settling over me. I do, Bill. They're not coming to make amends. They're trying to collect a feeling. They want to stop feeling guilty. What are you going to do? He asked, his gaze steady. I turned the cup slowly in my hands, tracing the rim with my finger. I'm not angry, Bill, and I'm not forgiving them either. I'm just done playing the part. What part? The always available mom. The mom who forgives no matter what. The mom who waits by the door forever saying, You can always come home. David never replied to that last text, and I didn't look back. But Ben came. He arrived one sunny afternoon, wearing a khaki baseball cap and a backpack covered in planets, his small face alight with excitement. As soon as he walked in, he grinned at me and asked, his voice bright, Grandma, do you have any ice cream? I laughed, the sound light and genuine, and ruffled his hair. Of course, sweetie. Chocolate. That afternoon, we did puzzles, drew pictures, and sat on a bench by the garden, telling stories. I told him about catching fireflies in the cornfields with my grandmother, about growing up in a time without television or computers. He listened with wide eyes, never once asking to leave, even when the sun started dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. I told him to take his drawing home with him, a colorful depiction of a spaceship with a cat in the cockpit. He looked up at me, his eyes full of innocent hope, and asked, "Can I come back and visit you again, Grandma?" I smiled, my heart full. "You can come any time you want, Ben." A few weeks after Ben's visit, word started to trickle in about David. His contract at the school had been terminated. He was once in line to become assistant principal, a rising star in the academic world, but after a heated argument with a group of parents over his teaching methods and a nosedive in his reputation, everything unraveled. Some said he fudged parts of his research record to secure funding. Others said he was simply arrogant, made too many enemies with his uncompromising standards. Whatever the reason, he was no longer the golden boy on the tenure track. Melissa didn't fare much better. Her department at the bank went through significant layoffs, and she was listed in the second round. One day, I stumbled across a sponsored ad from her on social media. She was selling personal finance courses for women, preaching financial independence while standing in her kitchen, a whiteboard taped awkwardly to the fridge behind her, a desperate attempt to salvage her career. I stared at that photo for a long moment, and for the first time in a while, I almost laughed at the sheer irony of it all. As for Eric, I'd known for a while his auto shop had gone under. He tried pivoting to RV rentals, seeing a market opportunity, but with a poor credit score and mounting debts, he couldn't secure a loan. Eventually, he ended up working for a national repair chain, a far cry from the independent garage he had dreamed of. He bounced to a new city, presumably seeking a fresh start, and changed his number, another disappearing act when things got hard. What didn't change was his habit, resurfacing only when there was something to gain, something to ask for. Each of them, in their own way, tried to reach for me again, once life started to fold in on them, once the carefully constructed facades of their success began to crumble. I remember it clearly. One night, past 10, I got a call from David. "Mom," his voice was brittle, strained. "I know it's late, but things are rough over here." He paused, and then came the familiar pitch, the hesitant request for money. "Could you loan me 2,000 just to hold us over a bit?" "For Ben." He used Ben's name, a calculated move, hoping to tug at my heartstrings. I listened to him finish, the silence stretching after his words. And then I asked, my voice calm and level, "Is it really for Ben, David, or are you just borrowing his name to soften your own fall?" He didn't answer, his silence a confirmation. I said, "I have the 2,000, that's not the problem. But I'm done spending money to help you dodge the consequences of your choices." And then I hung up. That winter, the snow fell thick and fast, transforming the retirement community into a winter wonderland. I organized a Christmas fundraiser across the community to raise money for seniors with medical needs, those who weren't as fortunate as I had been, to have a friend like Bill. Bill helped set up the tents in the community center, his sturdy hands working efficiently. The ladies from the sunroom baked over 50 apple pies, the sweet scent filling the air. Others donated handmade cards, bars of soap, and knitted scarves. We filled an entire row of tables with our offerings, a testament to the kindness and generosity of this little community. The director even invited a local paper to cover it. In their write-up, someone described me as a pine tree in winter, steady and resilient even in the wind. I didn't think I deserved that. I wasn't trying to be strong, I was just finally at peace. That evening, I sat out on the balcony of my apartment, the crisp night air invigorating, the stars stretched wide above me, a vast and silent universe. Bill handed me a mug of hot apple cider with a dash of cinnamon, the steam rising in the cold air. He asked, his voice quiet, "Do you still miss them, Grace?" I thought about it for a moment, the memories of my sons, of the life we had shared, a tapestry of joy and pain. "I miss who I thought they were, Bill," I said softly. He didn't say a word, just raised his mug gently and tapped it against mine, the ceramic clinking softly. "To the woman who finally let go of the fantasy," he said, his eyes twinkling in the faint light. I clinked his glass softly in return. "Cheers, Bill." In the second half of life, I finally stopped waiting for someone to come back, because I wasn't standing there anymore, rooted to the spot, hoping for a connection that had long since frayed. I had moved on, found my own peace, built my own community of caring individuals. Real happiness wasn't a destination, it was a journey I was finally taking on my own terms. I'm David. I stood at the gate of the Riverbend retirement community, the letter still in my hand, returned unopened. Not a crease on the envelope, not a smudge of ink on the perfect white paper. Even the word mom, written in my own handwriting on the front, hadn't been touched. It was the third one I'd sent. She hadn't replied to a single one. I told myself I'd made peace with the world no longer revolving around me, that I had accepted the consequences of my actions. But when I held that letter, still sealed in the same pristine state I'd sent it, it felt like something inside me split, just slightly open. She really wasn't coming back. I thought of her birthday, that day we all sat at the table, the tension thick in the air. She held that wooden box like it weighed more than just paper and cash, her face composed, but unfamiliar, looked nothing like the woman I thought I knew. I had assumed she was just old, fragile, feeling nostalgic. Maybe she wanted to reflect on the past a little, but instead she pulled the curtain back on something none of us ever dared touch: responsibility. That day, she didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just laid out every word we'd spoken, every choice we'd made, every absence we had justified, and held them up to the light, forcing us to see ourselves for who we truly were. I remember sitting there, scalp prickling, my face flushed and hot with shame. Melissa sat beside me, bouncing her knee nervously, looking to me for a signal, a script, anything to explain it all, to make it go away. But I had nothing to give her because what Mom had pulled out of that box wasn't money, it was the bill. The final invoice of a lifetime spent picking up after us, smoothing things over, holding things together without ever asking what it cost her. I used to imagine she'd break down one day, scream, throw a plate, slam a door, release the decades of pent-up frustration and disappointment. But she didn't. She just said, her voice quiet but firm, "I'll repay. The agreement's been signed. From now on, I won't be your burden." And then she turned around and left, never once looking back. That night, I drank too much, the alcohol doing little to numb the ache of regret. Melissa went on and on about how I'd let her be humiliated, how her own mother was just as dramatic, trying to shift the blame, to make it about something other than our own failures. But I didn't argue, because the truth was, I knew it wasn't her. It was me. It wasn't that I didn't love my mother, it's that I took her presence for granted, like a constant fixture in my life that would always be there, always available, always forgiving. I remembered the gloves she hand-stitched for me as a kid, the nights she stayed up tending to my fever, her cool hand on my forehead. Those memories were still there, clear as day. What I'd never considered was that she could grow old, that she could hurt, that she could lose hope, that she could reach a point where she was simply done. I realized that for the first time the day I saw Melissa's Hawaii photo again. She was smiling wide on the beach, hair windblown, Ben beside her, the embodiment of carefree happiness. The timestamp was from the exact week Mom was lying in a hospital bed, alone and terrified, waiting on money for surgery, her future uncertain. That's when it hit me, the full weight of how much of a coward I'd been. I remembered the second call she made, the faint hope in her voice, how she was trying not to sound desperate, how carefully she chose her words. And what did I say? I said, "Are you sure you're not being scammed?" Then I hung up and booked plane tickets to Hawaii, fleeing from the responsibility I should have embraced. I told myself it was overdue vacation time, that Ben needed the ocean, that Melissa and I needed the space. But on that beach with my camera aimed at Ben splashing in the waves, the sun warm on my face, I got a text from Eric. "She's had the surgery, Bill paid for it." I froze, the camera slipping from my grasp. That night, I stood on the hotel balcony and smoked a cigarette, the first one in 10 years, the harsh taste, a physical manifestation of the shame that washed over me. Not because I was anxious, but because I was ashamed. Real shame doesn't come from being misunderstood. It comes from being seen clearly, from having your failures laid bare, and knowing you failed the test of being a good son. I went to the retirement community once, not long after that, just to catch a glimpse, to see her from afar. From the edge of the lawn, hidden behind a large oak tree, I saw her with a few other women, planting roses in the garden. She moved slowly, carefully, her movements deliberate, her sun hat tilted over her brow. Her face looked peaceful, steady, a serenity I had never seen before. Bill stood nearby with a watering can, the two of them moving in quiet rhythm, like a team long established, comfortable in their shared space. I didn't go closer, didn't want to intrude on the peace she had found, but I know she saw me. She didn't wave, didn't turn her head. She just slipped off her gloves and went on digging, her back to me, a silent, definitive statement. And in that moment, I understood. She wasn't angry anymore. She just didn't need me anymore. Since then, life's been pretty rough. The school brought in new leadership, a young, ambitious department head who had no patience for what he called my old school standards and traditional teaching methods. My promotion fell through, my evaluation file got bounced back 3 times, each rejection a blow to my ego and my career. After the layoffs at the bank, Melissa fell into a slump, even worse than mine, struggling to find work in a competitive market. She tried offering online finance classes, a desperate attempt to create her own income stream, but barely anyone signed up. Eventually, we had to pull Ben out of piano lessons, an expense we could no longer afford. And honestly, sitting here now, I couldn't blame anyone but myself. It was just me, living in the aftershock of all the choices I'd made, or hadn't made, the consequences of my inaction rippling through every aspect of my life. And then I started dreaming of Mom. In my sleep, I was small again, sick and scared, clinging to her back as she rushed us through the cold night to the emergency room, one hand holding me, the other gripping a pair of mismatched shoes. Her voice steady and soft, a beacon of comfort in the darkness. Don't be afraid, baby. Mama's here. I'd wake up with a soaked pillow and a weight in my chest I couldn't shake, the memory of her unwavering love, a painful reminder of my own shortcomings. So I wrote her a letter. The first one she didn't open. The second one I made longer, pouring out my regrets, my shame, my slowly dawning understanding of the depth of her sacrifice. I wrote down everything. The first time I dodged her call with "I'm busy," the time I passed the buck with "That's not my decision," every moment I'd chosen the easier path instead of the right one, the path of responsibility and care. She didn't open that one either. The third letter, I folded it into a copy of my favorite educational psychology book, the one she'd bought me in college, a book that had shaped my career, and mailed it, a silent plea for understanding. That time she replied, not with a letter, but with a single line texted to my phone. "David, it's not that you didn't have chances, it's that every time you chose the wrong road." I cried like a child who had finally seen the mess he'd made and couldn't hide behind grown-up excuses anymore. Now, I teach at a nonprofit counseling center. It's not a fancy job. The pay is nothing special, a far cry from the university professor I once was. But for the first time in years, I feel solid, grounded, my work meaningful. Every Friday, I give a public seminar to a group of high schoolers on family accountability and what it means to show up for the people you love. And I tell them, my voice steady and sincere, love isn't just a feeling, it's a responsibility. It only matters if you show up in time. I don't know if I'll ever be able to make it all up to her, to truly atone for my failures. But I do know this. If Mom is sitting in that garden at Riverbend with her hands in the soil and the sun on her face, finding peace and happiness in her new life, maybe, just maybe, she'd feel a little peace knowing I've finally stopped running, that I've finally learned the lessons she tried so hard to teach me. And for the first time, I can quietly say, not to her, but to myself, Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I really did understand, eventually.